But if your goal is to have your children become independent thinkers and to be able to look at history and not just memorize things, but to understand and to have their own opinions, then this is the best curriculum for you. Before we get into explaining how this approach to history works, I'd like to introduce you to my family. I'm very blessed to have been married for 23 years. My wife is in our booth right now, busily setting up, doing the real hard work. And as I get to be here and talk to you about a subject that I like, history. We have 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. One of my daughters is right over here filming us, lovely and intelligent Teresa. Our oldest is now 21. He'll be 21 in about a week or so. This picture is 3 years old because we haven't gotten together to take a really nice formal picture in 3 years. We began homeschooling approximately 13 years ago for many of the same reasons that you are homeschooling. We wanted to have God as the central theme in our homeschooling. And my wife is from a math science background. She grew up in communist Czechoslovakia, where they were horrible with language arts and history and philosophy, because everything was indoctrination into believing the communist mindset. But they were excellent in science and math. And I'm from a history, English background, and we were very unhappy with how our children were being taught in school. I've also been a public school teacher for 18 years in Santa Ana. And I don't know how many of you are from the local area. How many of you here are from Los Angeles County? How about Orange County? San Diego? Out of state? Wonderful. So we've been living in San Clemente for the past 12 years. So that's kind of a quick background of our family. And I grew up in a family where my father was an intermediate school history teacher. And I have 10 brothers and sisters. I'm the 10th of 11. There were always great discussions at home about every single topic imaginable. And there were many arguments with my older siblings that I got to listen in on. Whenever I needed help in history, I thought I could go to my dad because he teaches history, and it's possible that I wouldn't have to work so hard. He would just give me the answer. However, he was a very wise man. He's now 84 years old. And whenever I asked him for help in something, he would always ask me a question. So I would ask him something about the American Revolution, and no matter what it was, his response would always be, first a question, and then we'd begin a discussion. And at the end of the discussion, I would realize that I really don't know that much about this topic that I'm supposed to know more of, and that I need to read more to find out more, so I could have a more worthy conversation with my dad. And he would always approach the topic with the words, John, this is what I know, kind of, but I'm really curious about what you think. And so this was from the age of about 13 and older when he would have this type of approach. Younger, he wouldn't torture me that way. So I became intrigued to learn more about history, and I was interested to have conversations like I was having with my dad, with others. I also didn't realize that most young boys didn't grow up in families like this, where they spoke to their dads about history, or in our age today, where they speak to their dads about anything. So I was extremely blessed. I have been teaching for 22 years, ever since I graduated from University of Redlands. For 4.5 years, I spent in Czechoslovakia in the 90s, and that's where my wife's from. So I began living there after the communists fell from power, but still, when the people were still voting in about 20% of the government who were still communists. And the Czechs were extremely eager to speak to Americans about every possible subject. And I taught English there during this time to adults, children, preschoolers, and business executives. It was very surprising to me and enjoyable that every topic was possible to discuss without offending anybody. So during the class, the Czechs wanted to talk about God, although most Czechs are atheists. They were interested to talk about religion, about anything, abortion, anything that you have to maybe tiptoe here in the United States. And as I was teaching English, I was also learning Czech at the same time. So my favorite approach to learning Czech would be to make friends with other men and to hang out with them and talk about history, politics, and religion. As a teacher and as a father and as a creator of curriculum, I try to live the call that we hear in Matthew 5, which is, "Be holy as your heavenly Father is holy." It's a tough call that Christ gives us, but I feel that when we're teaching history to kids ages 12 and above, it's not enough just to give them one perspective, the perspective that we believe to be correct. It's a great disservice to them. They need to be trained and taught how to analytically think and analyze history, and they need to be given the environment to have good discussions, to be able to write about history, and to pursue their own particular perspective in history. There's a few books here that inspired me academically. One is by Carl Gustafsson, A Preface to History. In my master's studies in history, this taught me the different ways that all historians analyze events in the past. History is cyclical, so once you learn these certain ways that you can look at the past, it's very easy, or it's easier to understand current events. The other book by Jacques Barzun, The Modern Researcher, taught me how important it is when creating a good argument to take my time, to do good research, and also to demand that of the young students that I have, ages 12 or 13 and older. I wrote this curriculum because there is a lack of critical thinking education in history. I think Joseph Stalin said something that's similar to, whoever controls history controls the present. And so it often seems, and probably is, those in political power would love for us just to memorize what they want us to memorize about the past. And we even see our current president going in the White House website on the history of past presidents, going in and changing certain key elements of how we should interpret the New Deal, for example, or any type of large governmental programs. Changing the words and also changing the history and interpretation of it. So I want to teach young people how to think critically so that they can see those things happening on their own. Because there will be a time, as in my family, the children are getting older now, and when dad says something, the first thing they think about is, "Right, Dad." They may not say that, but they're thinking about it. They want to go off on their own and discover on their own what they think. So while we have them in their young minds and they're next to us, we can give them these great tools of historical analysis. So when they are on their own, they will be able to figure things out. And maybe later, when they're 30 or 40, they'll realize, I guess Dad was kind of right. Or I'm really glad he taught me how to think well. Dorothy Sayers. I strongly recommend that all of you read this short article by Dorothy Sayers, maybe 11 pages long. And if you do a research on Dorothy Sayers, you will find this article. I believe it's called The Lost Tools of Learning. It should be up there on my screen. I'm sorry that it's not. The Lost Tools of Learning. And it's good if you're a homeschool parent, regardless of the age that you have, that you read this. I developed my curriculum before I read her essay. Because my curriculum initially was, this is a history curriculum. This is how you study history. But how you do any type of subject that is similar to history, like philosophy or literature, is very similar. And this essay that she writes very nicely puts everything in a great perspective so that it's easy for you to make objectives for your own family. So at the beginning of the year, maybe the end of the year right now, if you're like me at all, you're relieved that the year has come to a close. And you can maybe take a little break from the very challenging job of teaching. But you're also, right, you're thinking about next year, you're planning, what do I do for next year? This year I didn't quite finish what I wanted to do. How do I make sure that that doesn't happen next year? Or maybe you're thinking, I let my children down in these certain ways and how I was teaching. How do I make sure that doesn't happen next year? Most of the things that we're teaching our children when we homeschool does not involve academics. They involve approaches to how you should treat other people and how you should treat the subject that you're learning. So in those areas, I'm going to imagine that all of you were giant successes. That by your examples, you were wonderful examples to your children, how to treat others, how to behave with others, how to be respectful, how to want to know the truth, how to have that hunger to know the truth in every subject, how to be patient with other people, how to be patient with subjects. If your kids are learning these skills, which are taught regardless of the topic that you are teaching, then you were a huge success, and they will grow up and be wonderful people, intelligent, interested to learn. And Dorothy Sayers in this essay, although she doesn't specifically speak like that, you kind of understand this is the end result that she's getting at as well. So how many of you have read The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers? Okay, wonderful. So from this hour talk, hopefully I will have taught you at least one thing, and you will go and read this essay. And in that way you will learn much more. I know if I go to a teacher development and I learn one thing in 1 hour, my dad taught me that was a successful hour. I hope that this will be better than that. But definitely this is a great thing to read. So what she does is she breaks the levels of learning, the stages of learning, into 3 different stages. First is the grammar stage, before the age of 12. This is when children are very happy to show you what they've drawn, what they've memorized. They're happy to mimic. It can be called the parrot stage, playing games. So with my own children, I like to think of this as the zoo stage. The stage where the children love to go to the San Diego Zoo. I mentioned San Diego Zoo because we're in Southern California, and I really enjoy the San Diego Zoo. But after the age of 12 or so, the kids no longer are very excited to go. They're going just because they have to go. Because at the zoo, the zoo is set up to teach you what the animals eat, where they live, and what they look like. But there's no deep analysis going on. I guess if you visit the polar bear area, you will get an indoctrination of the evils of global warming. But there will be no discussion, there will be no counter evidence, which does exist, which would make that exciting. It's not there. So this is the grammar stage. And for teaching history, our company has created games that teach history. They're fun games. They teach basic facts, chronology, some critical thinking skills. And so the kids will memorize things and have a firm basis in these basic points So they're prepared later when they're 13 or so, and they start to question mom and dad and question things. They'll have at least a basics in history understanding. In the dialectic or logic stage, this is where the student is starting to express his own thoughts, coming up with excellent ideas of why he should be doing things sometimes that are great, sometimes that are not so great. And how many of you have children over 12 years and older in here? 12 and older. Okay, wonderful. Most of you. So the curriculum that we create is for that age, ages 12 and over. And I've been a middle school teacher for 18 years, teaching grades 6, 7, and 8. So I've become a lover of students of this age. They're very exciting because intellectually they can grasp just about everything. Just about everything. They're ready, and it's new to them. And they want to let you know what they think. And they need to learn how to think in a way that's logical and reasonable. And they're open to learning how to do it. They're not interested to memorize things anymore in history. It's boring for them. It's just a bunch of hard work, and it makes no sense. So that's the dialectic or logic stage. In the rhetoric stage, same concepts are being taught, but in history education, they're reading more challenging texts. They're reading more primary source documents, which I'll talk about later. And we should be giving them more times to present. I make the junior high kids in my homeschool groups also make a formal presentation at the middle of the year. I try to do this at the middle of the year, definitely at the end of the year, a formal presentation. It's a wonderful way for them to express what they think. They make it in front of the parents and the children who were in the little, history group, or you can invite grandma and grandpa. And it's also a wonderful way for them to know that they have to work very hard because in 3 weeks they're going to be presenting to 10 other people. And so it's just a great way, this public presentation. I strongly recommend, at whatever history curriculum you choose, at the end of the year, they make a presentation in front of others and give them a month to prepare. And every week, talk to them about it. And then when they present, it's best if they use no notes, because then they will have to know it. If they use notes, they may just read from the notes and be very nervous about it. So, classical education and history. This is an approach. So it's not necessarily something that you memorize. It's also not specifically a method that you follow. And if you follow it wrong, you mess up everything. I have found this, my wife will tell me that one of the things that I'm good at is just kind of making do with what's there with the history class. And when she teaches a course, she's a much harder worker than I am and always more well prepared. But sometimes that approach in history analysis gets in the way, because sometimes the discussion will go in a way where you didn't imagine it to go. And so you have to be a little bit more loose with the history discussion. So it was first implemented by the Greek historians Herodotus and Thucydides, who wanted to investigate, travel, interview people, and find out what actually happened. Before that time, most histories were written by people who were trying to praise the king or the leader. And when we read these today, we have to be very careful to know and figure out, did that actually happen, or were they just trying to praise the leader? We all know that certain journalists favor certain politicians. So when we read those journalists, we're very cautious. Oh, did that really happen? I don't know, I need to read a few more articles about it. Well, with Thucydides and Herodotus, they laid the foundation. This is how you write history. So there are these five steps that my students, ages 12 and older, use when they learn history. The first is tools of the historian. They learn what does every historian do, and the students learn how they do that as well. So at the beginning of the year, they learn these tools. Then they're given open-ended questions. Questions that could have 2 or 3 or 4 possible answers. So never a yes or no question for the big discussion. Then they do their research. As a 12 or 13-year-old, I recommend them using one textbook and maybe one primary source document. So a primary source document is something that was created by an eyewitness to history. The textbook is something that was created by somebody, doesn't have to be alive today, but somebody who was not an eyewitness. So it's nice to have that textbook because it might be more understandable to them if it's a good textbook and not a horrible one, of course. Then the primary source document is from the actual person from that time period. So if they were going to be studying something on the Declaration of Independence, they might read an article by someone who's alive today, and then they should read the actual Declaration of Independence to analyze it. The Socratic discussion. This is my favorite part of teaching history. And in my homeschool history class, we meet 30 times a year. So we meet about once a week. And we have 3 weeks off for Christmas, a couple of weeks off for Easter, a week off for Thanksgiving. And don't think that every time we meet, we have a big, very exciting, interesting Socratic discussion. It takes time for the kids to learn the tools of the historian at the beginning of the year, and then they receive the open-ended question, and then they need time to go do their research. So at the beginning of the year, the first 8 times that we meet, we might have 2 bigger Socratic discussions. As the year goes on, they've already learned the tools, so they don't need to repeat them, and then we start having almost a discussion per week. And the last step is the analytical writing process. And writing a paper for history is different than writing one for English. And most kids are practicing creative type writing. That is wonderful. It's interesting. But in their lifetime, they will rarely be asked to do that. Also, when you're creating argument, if you cannot write your argument down, it's not a good one. So Americans have become very good at expressing themselves in words, but we're very poor in expressing ourselves in writing and creating the argument. So that's the step 5 of this approach to history. And once the children go through these steps a few times, then they will apply this model to all other writing pieces they have where they have to make an argument. And it makes it very easy for them, from age 12 on up through college and through life, if they're trying to make up their mind on something important, or if they have to present something to others, they already have this process to use that's very successful, and it's easy in its way that anybody can do it. I'm going to very quickly list here all the tools of the historian that we teach. And if you, I'm going to have my daughter, Teresa, start handing out our email list. If you would like this PowerPoint presentation, I will send it to you this week. So you can take notes, of course, but you can also have it. So, opinion or fact? There have been many surveys in the last 10, 15 years how Americans have changed from making up their minds based on facts and logic, and instead many Americans base their decisions on opinions and emotions. I had a discussion with a colleague a week or so ago, and he told me that he had watched this movie, this documentary, and it made him cry, and that's how strongly he feels about this. And we did some initial research, some of my students and I, on this topic, and realized that there is a great amount of information in this documentary that's completely false. And the producers were just trying to get people emotional to help them decide about something. And my colleague didn't see that. So this is a great danger. And we need to have our children know right when they're ready to analyze things, which is about the age of 12, what's an opinion and what's a fact. And that when you make an argument, it needs to be based on facts. And opinions are fine, but you need to back those up with evidence as well. Making historical judgment. We make historical judgments all the time, and who was the greatest president in the last 50 years? Which economic policies have been strengthening America? Which have been weakening America? These are historical judgments. And so it's great to have young people practice these on things in history, things that have taken place 200 years ago. You and I are probably very similar. We're very passionate about the current events that are going on now, and sometimes it's hard to step away from that and make a good reasoned judgment. And so in the classroom, in the history that we're studying, right, ancient civilizations, medieval, it's easier because we're more removed from it. What kind of evidence can you use in making an argument? Analyzing primary sources and secondary sources, using quotes to strengthen your argument. How to paraphrase, how to prioritize by importance. Of course, the Socratic discussion, my favorite tool of the historian. Understanding cause and effect, compare and contrast, change over time, and then the writing process. So each of these tools of the historian, what I did was, I took the different historical time periods, ancient, medieval, American, up to the Civil War, and then modern American, modern world, and American government economics. And in each of the books, I initially wrote all of the tools of the historian in each of these books with a teacher's guide how to use it. So week 1, teach this historical thinking tool, and then read this history assignment. Week 2, teach the next 2 historical thinking tools. And then at a certain week, then they would get an open-ended history question based on the content they're learning. So I initially wrote these and began to teach homeschool classes, and this was 4 years ago. And I asked the homeschool moms, at the middle of the year, how can I teach your children better? And so they said, well, we've been sitting over there in the living room listening to your classes, and all of us want to use this approach that you use when you teach history. And we're kind of just doing it on our own without you telling us how to do it. We want you to make DVDs of you teaching these tools so that we could use them. And then you should go to Ohio, where there are so many homeschoolers, and start promoting this approach. And so based on their direction, I created a DVD program where I am teaching the tools of the historian to a group of homeschool children. And all of the tools are taught. And then we take an open-ended history question the kids do their research, and we have a discussion. And then for one complete year, I taught junior high ancient civilizations, and we recorded all of our Socratic discussions that are in this book. So a complete year of history Socratic discussions, so that if you were to get our curriculum and you were teaching one child, you would have the discussion, and then you could watch as I have the discussion with my 5 students. And that would be like your the answer key. Like, what are the possibilities? Where could this discussion go? So we videotaped 1 year of ancient, 1 year of medieval, and 1 year of American, again in the junior high series. Then I met Adam Andrews, who has his program with his wife Missy Andrews and their family, and Adam Andrews is here, Center for Literacy. And he said, John, this is great. I'm going to adopt this for my family. This will be my family's history program. But you know what? You're not done yet. You have to tie in which history sources the family should use. You can't expect someone who hated history or who never really paid much attention because they didn't like it or they had a bad teacher. You can't expect them to choose the best history texts. So then we did, for grades 6 through 12, tied these discussions with history texts. And so then we have a parent guide which walks you through how to teach this in 1 year. And you can learn these tools of the historian along with your children at the same time. So there's not a whole lot of preparation. Now, if you're teaching high school children, it's different because the texts are so thick. They're so big. Then it's more challenging. You have to pray that you've done a wonderful job teaching honesty. Because then when your children, when your 16-year-old makes an argument about the New Deal and presents a bunch of evidence, and you're not really sure if it's true or not, you could say, okay, show me the pages in the book where you got that information, because I'm curious. And that's a valuable thing for a student to do, to cite exactly where he got it. But it's challenging to keep up with the reading in high school. In junior high, it's not as challenging. The books that we have are fairly simple. Hopefully, they're at our stand right now. When we were unpacking at 3 o'clock, we realized we left some things at home. So if they're not there today afternoon, they'll be there tomorrow. Sometimes that happens when you have something very close. You leave few things behind. So I'd like to show you one of the tools of the historian. Fact in history is a statement that is accepted as true. A fact often refers to a date, a person, or a document. For example, the Declaration of Independence was written and signed in 1776. We know this happened because we have the original document, the men who wrote and signed this document wrote about it, and observers wrote about it as well. There is no doubt in anybody's mind whether the facts in this statement are true. Opinion. An opinion is an expression of somebody's ideas and is debatable. Opinions that are based on facts and good reasoning are stronger than opinions not based on facts. In history, opinions alone tend to be less persuasive than when a person supports his opinions with facts. So each of our tools of the historian is structured similarly like this. They're presented with something that historians use. They're presented with the definition, and then they have a small activity to do so they can practice this idea. So opinion or fact. Life for early man was more peaceful than our life today. Opinion. Teachers who are nice don't assign homework. Opinion. Good job, young lady. She knows. Oh, sorry about that. All right. Almost everybody's favorite food is pizza. Mesopotamia means the land between two rivers. Fact. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. So once they are familiar with this, then they are given an argument with a sample of two different students responding to a question, and they have to make a decision which argument is stronger. So the question is, in our Ancient Civilizations book, made for ages 12 to 14, did the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia contribute much to world civilizations? Student 1. The ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia contributed much to the world. These societies rocked. When there was a really big war, the Sumerians and Assyrians knew how to fight hard. These societies would use a lot of arrows in their battles, and the enemy wouldn't know how to respond. Most of the time, the enemy would just die or quit. Also, have you seen pictures of the great Babylonian kings? They dressed magnificently. And Mesopotamia was the land between two rivers, so therefore, this area had to have a lot of water. All in all, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia contributed much to the world. And now the student reads Student 2. The ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia contributed much to the world. The Sumerians created the first written language. We call this cuneiform. Sumerians also were the first people to use the wheel for transportation. The Babylonian king Hammurabi established one of the first written law codes known as Hammurabi's Code. These laws helped the weak against the strong, protected women's property rights, and regulated doctors' fees. Also, the Hittites discovered how to use iron, which at that time was the strongest metal in the world. Phoenicians gave us the world's first alphabet with 22 symbols. And the Hebrews were the first people ever to worship only one God, and therefore brought monotheism to all. Yes, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia contributed much to the world. So, which student is more persuasive? Student 1 or Student 2? Student 2 is more persuasive. And couple of the questions that are here in this booklet is copy one sentence that is an opinion, copy one sentence that is a fact, and then it asks the students to respond to these two arguments. Which one is more persuasive and why? So at the beginning of the year, all the students understand that to create a strong argument in history, you need to have evidence. And in order to have evidence, they will find out they have to read. So this is something great to refer to the kids. If it's April or May, you can refer them back to this to remind them that they need to have evidence to have a good argument. Okay, open-ended questions. There are question types that historians use that are similar. They just change depending upon the content you're learning. And these are the main question types. They are also the types of questions that are used on AP exams. And unfortunately, the US AP high school exam is something I will strongly not recommend based on all of the changes that is happening and how it's related to the College Board. But it used to be kind of a great thing to look at if you're shooting for honors level history. Now, a 12 and a 13-year-old can tell you why they think the civilizations of Mesopotamia were important. They can do that type of work. Some people at first will think, oh, this sounds so challenging. But it's really not. What's amazing is that the 16-year-old can do the same type of work, but it'll just be more in depth. And so each of our Take a Stand books, which are these, has each of these question types. So when you go through our program, the student is familiar with every type of history question that they will face throughout their academic career, whether in high school or college, or whether they're trying to understand current events. This is a list of influences of history. I'm interested in them. I won't bore you with them though. And they're also intertwined in our questions. So if you're studying for the American history book, your student would handle every type of history question plus every type of influence in history. And also, of course, they're focusing on learning the history. They don't know all of these things are going on. They don't know that they're practicing all of these levels of reasonings. They're just more interested in the history that they're studying. I guess to give you one example, revolutions typically take a certain cycle, whether it's the French Revolution or others. And so there's a way that historians approach revolution in studying it that helps you understand all kinds of revolutions that happen. Open-ended history questions. So these are the things that one of the things that makes history class interesting for me is I'm curious how my daughter Teresa is going to view George Washington and the Founding Fathers. And the only way I will know that is if she learns the tools of the historian, if she reads, and if I ask her. How she views it is going to be different than my son Philip, who will have read the same things, he'll have read the same tools, but he has a different perspective, a different way of looking at history. And so this is an exciting time for the parent to learn how your children think, how they analyze the past, based on these questions. Also, you'll find, as my father taught me, the more you study history, the less you know. And your students will surprise you in their perspectives that they have. They're the 13-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, they will teach you things you never thought of. Good things. So it's really exciting. My 20-year-old son is home for a few days before he takes off to my wife's country to visit the Czech Republic for 6 weeks, and then he's going off to Thailand for a semester. And it's really nice to have discussions with him. It's very interesting. It's also very challenging. I often lose any argument that we have because he brings up things that I just hadn't thought of. So here are some of the open history questions that your students would encounter from our books. What was the greatest reason for the end of the Roman Empire? Why did Rome change from persecuting Christians to adopting Christianity? Was Napoleon a hero or a villain? Was Charlemagne more pagan or Christian? Who held more power in medieval Europe, the popes or the kings? What was the primary reason for the Reformation? Was the United States justified in dropping the atomic bomb on Japan? Or a topic that we just discussed in my classroom, was the United States justified in going to war with Mexico in the Mexican-American Revolution? Or was Mexico justified in going to war against the United States in the Mexican-American Revolution? Of course, you could do this with every single war, and it creates a lot of excitement. You could, of course, discuss this with Iraq and Afghanistan. And if they know the tools of the historian, and they know how to do research and reading, it will be a very interesting conversation. Compare and contrast a free market system to a planned economy. Which is better? So we all have our own biases, and it's fine that your students will find out yours. I was told by some university professors who teach primarily from the Socratic discussion that at the end of the discussions they give their own opinions and cite their evidence. So I do that as well. And it's a great opportunity for you to let your kids know what you think. After they have done the reading, the research, the analysis, after they've done that, they will respect you more because they will see how much work is involved in forming a good opinion. It's kind of like someone who has never played the piano before, it's challenging for that person to appreciate a good pianist. So your children need to go through the work of being a history person to appreciate a good opinion. What is the proper role of religion in American education? And who has been America's greatest demagogue? So these are exciting topics that I'm very interested to hear what my students think, and you could hear what your children think about them as well. The research. So we spoke a little bit about primary sources. We have lists of literature for students to read that are tied to each of our open-ended history question. So sometimes they're challenging, sometimes they're easy, but they're real history, and it's really exciting to hear what people at that time wrote and how they thought. I write a current event article once a week, and I send it out by email. The current event is current event for youth, ages 10 to 18. My oldest daughter, Jessica, writes a current event article, current event for kids, for ages 5 to 10. And during tax season, I wrote an article on, tax day. What is tax day? When is it coming? And then all of my current event articles show the historical context in which they came from. So before 1913, the federal government did not tax our income. This came from the 16th Amendment. So that's part of the current event. And then I researched, what did the Founding Fathers think about taxes? Well, one of the things that most Founding Fathers thought is that taxes on income weren't bad, but they should be handled by the states. Another thing they thought was that taxes on the poor should be higher, because anybody who was poor should feel the pain of it, so they will work harder to get out of being poor. Such a great difference in opinion than what we would ever hear from anybody today. It was wonderful. It was very exciting to read that. So I found that out through reading a primary source document. By the way, the email that you gave me, I will be sending you a current event per week on Wednesday. And if you don't like it, just opt out of it. But it will send you to my current event site, where I have now about 7 months of current event articles. And some of them are not going away, like the Arab-Israeli conflict or Common Core. Most of them are not going away. But they're a one-page article and with 5 questions for discussion. So I use them in my history classes. At about the 12th or 13th week, the students need a little variety in their studies of history. And so I'll teach a class where we'll read a current event and we'll discuss it. And then I'll give them an assignment, go to my website, read another current event, and next week you're presenting it and you're leading the discussion. So that is it's one of the fun things that you can do with history and with current events. I had 400 copies of this current event printed out, but I think we left it at home. So my 2 little daughters, who are 9 and 7, will be prepared. Will be dressed as Cleopatra, the other as Pocahontas. They're going to be handing out the current events tomorrow. Unless we found it in the car. So, fiction. We're very careful using fiction, because fiction can be misused so easily with history. A story such as The Crucible, written in the 60s, I believe, about the Salem witch trials, was really about the McCarthy era involving communists in Hollywood. So we have to be very careful sometimes in reading fiction, that the author's purpose is not to teach history, but to teach relationships and theme. So our lists are good, and that they don't confuse the children in that area. Okay, Socratic discussion. So every parent who's trying their best to be a loving parent can lead the Socratic discussion. Sometimes parents feel, how can I do this? I know nothing about history. Well, your student has their own opinions. They're eager to let you know about them. And sometimes your main job is to love, all the time, your main job is to love them, to be consistent, to say when history class is. We're meeting every Monday at 2 o'clock. That's when it is. This is the assignment for next week. And then you're there, you're the adult. Just by age, it seems we're prepared. Age and our character. I do have some samples on my website. You can see me leading kids in the Socratic discussion. Analytical writing lessons. As you saw how the fact and opinion lesson is taught, in the same way, our books teach writing. So we give a definition of what is a good thesis. There's a sample of what is a good thesis in history. And then we have a 4-step process we have the kids do when they write a good thesis for them to know, is this a good thesis or a poor thesis? And it's all written at a level where anyone could do it. So this is probably the main thing about the Socratic discussion, whether it's history or literature or religion. Maybe you've had an experience where there's a person in history who just seems to know everything, and he's the most boring person alive. And after 4 minutes, you tune out and you don't remember anything he said. And you could never imagine talking like that. You're going to be a great Socratic discussion leader, because your children are the exact same way. It's maybe 1 in 1,000 persons who love to listen to a very long lecture from someone who's kind of an encyclopedia. But most of us are not like that, and it doesn't promote critical thinking. So these are some of the materials that I showed you when I was holding them up again. I'll just go ahead and do that. So if you were to teach this on your own, we have a complete curriculum set for every age, from age 12 and older. That includes the parent guide that walks you through what to do every lesson. It includes the tools of the historian taught by me. The critical thinking open-ended history questions. And then it also includes the history texts and the primary source documents. Here are our specials that we're running here. You can order it, and then we'll ship it to you. And I'm also teaching online classes for grades 6 through 12. We meet in, the Tuesday times are from 3:30, and if we meet for 50-minute classes. So the ancient history class meets 3:30 to 4:20 about. Tuesdays are for junior high, and Wednesdays are for high school. And we meet 30 times throughout the year. The price for that is normally $360 for the year, but our convention special is 20% off. And also, we're a charter schools vendor, so we can take POs from charter schools. We offer our weekly current event. It's from a Judeo-Christian perspective. We have games, and I'm not sure what number booth we're at, but we have 2 booths. We're across from CAP, Classical Academic Press. Next to Classical Conversations. Are there any questions? I'm here all weekend with my family, so if you have independent, yes.
So for those of us that have kids that are not quite to the level that you're teaching, well, maybe you don't want to say this out loud or record it, but there's a plethora of history programs for grammar level. Do you have any that you recommend, that you enjoyed, that you have used yourself? Because it's very confusing for those who are trying to figure out, and you can become overwhelmed very easily with just too much information.
I have an app that teaches American history on the iPad. Okay. The app has 10 books and 25 games. So I love that.
Is it your app?
It's my app. Yeah, it's the Classical Historian app. It came out 2 months ago. One thing about printing is if it's expensive to print. The online materials obviously are not. I've just noticed it's maybe more challenging for the parent to make sure their child reads it. But with our app, if you have an iPad, it's $3.99. The books read out loud to you, read aloud books. There are 10 books which cover all American history up to World War I. I think they're wonderful. And then there are 25 games. So they have puzzles, kind of like a Candy Crush copy game, but with history images from American history. And to find that app, if you go to my website, it tells you what to link to. So that's my favorite curriculum right now, in that form. And then my wife's here, and she really is in charge of, especially with the younger ones.
We knew that.
Good. So she can tell you as well what we do. And she's an amazing person. Yes.
Along the same lines, I know we're not wanting to use fiction while we're teaching history, but along with the classical model, a lot of times they want to integrate all your subjects so that you're kind of repeating certain things. So let's say that you're studying the ancients and we have your curriculum and they're looking at some arguments, but you also want to pull a book out of, say, Veritas Press, a literature book that is fiction but takes place in that time period. Is that a bad thing to do? Or
I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I don't think it's a bad thing to do.
Enjoyment, but don't use this as a tool for your research.
Not a primary source. Yeah. It's not a source for history.
How you expressed it is perfect. If they're an 8th grader writing an essay trying to prove a point from the ancient world, then they can't use a fictional novel unless they're doing it in some creative way. They know what the author meant. Maybe the author wrote an essay, what he wanted you to interpret this as. Yeah.
Are your classes just online at this point?
My classes are just online except for the American history for junior high kids. That's going to be live. It'll be online and in San Clemente.
Oh, okay, so there's an actual place you can go to in San Clemente?
Yes.
And then it's also online?
Yes.
Okay.
Or if you're teaching, you could teach a co-op in your area.
And you say you have a book list, is that for each class?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And families have done that. They've created co-ops. It's nice if you have 2 or 3 people coming. All right, well, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you this weekend.